Welcome to Big Y Business Chats, brought to you by Ethical Hour, the go-to online community for business owners with a bigger purpose, who work for people, planet and profit. I'm your host, Sian Conway-Wood, an ethical marketing strategist, sustainability writer and founder of Ethical Hour. In these conversations, I interview inspiring Big Y business founders to find out how they're making positive change happen and how you can too. Let's meet today's guest. Today I'm joined by Claire. Welcome, Claire.
Hello.
And Claire does many things in the impact space, but in particular what we're talking about today is her work with the Woodland Burial Company. So Claire, it's Love a Tree Day. That's what's bringing us together. Happy Love a Tree Day.
Thank you so much. I do love trees. It is nice to be able to get my tree hugger on.
Me too, and I'm looking forward to talking all about trees. So tell us a bit about the Woodland Burial Company.
It was started about 3 years ago now, funded by the Faunus Group, who are a sort of green investment company. And one of their directors, Simon, his father passed away and he was working overseas. And by the time he got back, his mum had been signed up to all sorts of things, and none of which felt particularly like his dad. His dad was a huge, passionate grower and tree lover. He would have loved Love a Tree Day. And Simon just sort of felt, it didn't represent him. And so he said to his mum, what do you think Dad would actually like if he could choose anything? And his mum said, well, he'd want to be in a woodland with a tree. And so Simon went, well, let's do that then. And because there wasn't a huge amount of options in that field in terms of established woodland burial, where the trees are already there, he decided to start the Woodland Burial Company. He kind of felt it can't just be him. It can't just be his dad, who had this sort of passion for the environment and wanted to continue that after their death. I think a lot of us, are very busy making our life as green as possible and as eco-friendly and very concerned about, where we buy and what we buy. And then suddenly at death, all of that seems to go out the window and we do incredibly sort of unfriendly environmental choices. And it's really about sort of challenging that, I suppose, and coming up with some alternatives for people.
You and I have spoken before about this and about the fact that actually a lot of the choices that you are faced with are really uneco-friendly, and it's not something that you would necessarily think about until you're in that position where you have to make those decisions, which obviously at that point you're very emotional.
Exactly. And they're not the best times, are they, for us to suddenly be faced with, some quite complicated decisions. In the same that, we think about, I think, was it last week, the jute bag is actually 8,000 plastic carrier bags, which is more eco-friendly. Sometimes we're not in a space in the midst of grief to start to think about these quite complex things. So allowing or encouraging people to do that in advance is really powerful. So it's also Dying Matters Week this week. And that is, an opportunity that's run by Hospice UK. And again, it's just trying to get these conversations started so we can think about them. And they're not necessarily easy topics. They're not necessarily comfortable discussions, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. How our death impacts the world should have the same attention as how our life impacts the world. I mean, it's been an extraordinary journey for me because it's not my background, it's not my knowledge space. So as you say, I've sort of came into environmentally positive living through one route and ended up here through a completely different, unexpected way. So it's been a learning curve.
There's just so many different elements to it, isn't there? What really struck me, we had a good chat a little while ago now about kind of greenwashing and just in general, but particularly in the funeral industry. And it's not really somewhere that would necessarily come to mind. In the work that we're doing, we think greenwashing, we maybe think fast fashion, think of Amazon, we think of packaging, all of that kind of stuff. But it really does apply to every single industry. And it's going on in the funeral industry as well, isn't it?
It is. And I think some of it is just lack of knowledge. Because people don't want to have these conversations and therefore they don't happen, we all just sort of bumble along as we always have. I think as well, it's also a lack of scientific basis. And so a lot of us would like it to be true that, if you just were buried, without any accoutrements into the earth, that would we consider natural. And the word natural is used a huge amount in the funeral industry. I have a massive problem with the word natural because it gives this connotation of being a positive word. But actually, science tells us that when we decompose, we are full of chemicals, and some of them are toxic to the environment, and we can have a huge negative impact. So even though that's natural in the sense that we're not adding perhaps anything, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best option given what we know about the soil and microbacteria and things and nutrients. So it's trying to find ways to bring in that more scientific grounding and knowledge rather than perhaps the more, I'm going to use the word hippie, which perhaps is not very PC, but, there is a lot of research that's really impactful about how we can do better. And I think that has to take the fore and be leading rather than, just things that look pretty. I mean, wool shrouds, are beautiful. I mean, completely beautiful. But actually, keratin means they don't degrade very well in the soil. Cardboard coffins are probably the best option. But what we've discovered is that because people want them to look a certain way, because it is a very jarring experience, to look at any sort of coffin or casket. And if it's not beautiful, that just is another layer of pain, isn't it? So I understand people want them to look a certain way. So a lot of the cardboard ones now are being printed with, pretty much anything, actually. You can have flags, flowers, animals, you can have what you like. And that's fabulous to look at, but you're taking quite an environmentally positive option and laminating it, essentially. And so it's all of these little things that research allows us to just make better choices, really, and more informed choices.
I think with death and funerals, there's so much ritual around it, isn't there? And it's balancing that with the kind of behaviour and everything else that goes into protecting the environment. But I think you're right that actually, if you live in an eco-friendly way, you want to die in an eco-friendly way. And that's a really beautiful way, actually, of honouring the way that you've lived as well.
Yes, definitely. And I think the other thing is that I think we can do all of these things if we think about them first. So it became very quickly, it became clear that people like to bring flowers. So nearly all of our families, probably me excluded, when they come to Granville's Wood, they like to bring flowers with them. And so over time, we had lots of plastic containers arriving for these flowers. Now, we can't have plastic containers in there, but we can appreciate this need to bring a tribute. It's a really powerful force. And so rather than saying you can't do that because that plastic one isn't environmentally friendly, we go back to the drawing board and say, well, what is the most environmentally positive way of allowing that part of grief to, it's all part of a process, isn't it? And if people need that to happen, how do we support them with that? And so we've created wooden vases. And actually, they hold water really well. And we found, interestingly, that flowers last much longer in them than they did just in the sort of water in the plastic. So we gave all of those free to our families that wanted one. It's finding that way of meeting a need, but thinking it through. So a lot of natural burial grounds don't allow any markers at all. And that's a huge issue for a lot of people for all sorts of reasons. So at Granville's, we looked into that. What's the most environmentally positive way of doing that? And so we do allow markers. They're a brass plat. They're fixed in size. They go either on a bench if you have a bench, or they go on a tree stump. So they don't sort of cause any additional furniture, as it were. So they're a fixed size. You can have whatever you like on that fixed size. And the research we did, not research scientific at that point, research at home, is that we buried loads of things and we saw what had the least impact on the earth. And brass, when it degrades, has very little negative mineral impact on the earth. So that's how we solved it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's about taking that need that someone has in terms of their grief and honouring their loved one, and walking with them and with the needs of the woodland to find, a compromise that allows the woodland to thrive, and for that family to feel heard and to feel that they can express things in a way that's meaningful to them. So we're always trying to, instead of saying you can't do things, We try to think about how you can meet that need in the best way. So we don't allow people to plant their own bulbs, because lots of people were buying foreign bulbs, bluebells and things. And actually the woodland we're in is quite protected. It has native flowers in that are quite rare. So we said, look, you can't do this, but we have sourced UK grown woodland bulbs. We know where they come from. We have traceability from growth, and you can plant them, but you have to source them through us. We don't make any profit from that, but it allows us to have that traceability, and it allows us to let people do the thing they want to do in the way that works for the woodland. So there's not much, to be fair, that there's not much we can't figure out if we keep those conversations going.
It's so good that you are considering those compromise areas, because I think whenever we do anything in sustainability, there is those compromises, and it is kind of matching it up with our needs and also the needs of the environment and us as part of that environment. And what you were saying there about planting native species and things, there's so many similar kind of issues in the tree planting space.
I mean, we're very blessed because we have established trees. So a lot of our families choose to plant a tree as a memorial, but actually a lot of our families, so I haven't planted a tree. A lot of people who know Ethical Hour will know me from the Frugal family and know that very sadly our son died very suddenly and tragically in an accident in 2019. Sorry, deep breath. So we don't have a marker because I don't know yet what I want that to say. We haven't planted a tree, but that's mostly because the bit of the woodland I picked, and I didn't work for them at this stage. This has been a bizarre process that's happened since. But there was a beautiful oak tree. I mean, it's fabulous. It's not fully grown at all, but there was something about, we walked around the corner and I just went, can I have that oak tree? So we haven't needed to plant because there was something already there that was thriving and exactly what we wanted. But we do allow people to plant, but yes, we have a list of native species, and also it's about the right tree in the right place, isn't it? So if every one of our families wanted to plant an oak, they're not all going to live, because that isn't how oaks grow. And so it's also understanding, I think there's an awful lot of goodwill out there and good intention. And some of our neighbours, so the woodland we're in, there are other parts of it that are also privately owned. And some of our neighbours we see doing things and we think, oh my goodness, it's a wonderful intention, but actually it could potentially be quite damaging. And I think it's coming from a place of knowledge and research, and that's really powerful to make sure that we're putting the right tree in the right place. I have a bit of an issue with a lot of tree planting. It also feels so we're actually carbon negative. I did all my maths for Earth Day. I'm not good at maths. I found that a really stressful post to write to do all my maths, but we're actually carbon negative. And of course that's not particularly because we're special, that's really because we own a woodland. But we have added to that, we do plant to sort of continue that process. And we don't sell our carbon offset, we don't allow anybody to buy that. We just send that out into the ether. And we feel quite passionately about that, because I worry that a lot of people are not changing their behaviour. They're just throwing, oh, well, I don't need to because I've offset it and I've planted a tree and I've done this very distant thing that actually I have no real connection to, but it absolves me of responsibility. Even though we're carbon negative, we are still working to improve that distance between what we produce and what we sequester. So there's still more work to be done. Even if you're lucky enough to be in that situation, that doesn't mean that you stop and go, well, I don't need to worry about that anymore.
I think that just sums up the experience of running a sustainable business, doesn't it? Because there's a scale of sustainability, and at one end you've got kind of the greenwashers that are offsetting but not changing their behaviour, like you said, and you've got businesses that are doing absolutely nothing. And then at the other end you've got the businesses that are in Ethical Hour, the businesses like yours that are doing as much as they possibly can, and also always looking for new opportunities, always learning, always being open about that. And what I love is in these conversations with people like you is just that we get to share that experience of this is where the compromises are, and this is, you know, we've had to make difficult decisions about this, or we've had to try this out, or we got this wrong at one point and now we're changing it. And I think that openness, that transparency, that's how we learn to do better in this space.
Absolutely. I mean, I had no idea. I'm from a family who generally cremate, and I think that's habit. I don't think that's anything any of us have thought about for a very long time. I personally definitely didn't want to be cremated. I have no idea why. I blame a James Bond film, but I don't know if that is the reason. But it was something I knew I didn't want. But I didn't know cremated ashes were toxic. I mean, how would I ever have found that out? It's just not a normal topic of conversation. They're not even ash. So I've learned so much in the last coming up to a year. And it's fascinating. I mean, it's just completely fascinating. And there's another company that the Faunus Group are funding called Natural Transitions. And I love reading all of their research because they're about to launch a really exciting product. And potentially the trees planted in that particular soil product sequester 20% more carbon. I mean, it's staggering. And that's research from University of Reading. You know, it's scientific data, it's proven. And that's really exciting to be at kind of cutting edge. And just thinking about the ways in which we can take something quite dark and, you know, desperately sad, but we can still find something in there that can move us forward, you know, and that's also really powerful. I think if you was to stop learning, you know, we'd all still be having our carrier bags, wouldn't we, from the shop? And, you know, we weren't bad people. Women that gave their babies gin, you know, in the 20s weren't bad people necessarily. That was just a suggestion that was made and it worked. So no one thought much of the consequence. So, yeah, I think that learning is really powerful.
And I think what you're touching on there is that kind of sustainability shame of when you've made decisions in the past and then you learn. And, you know, even just saying about ashes being not ashes and being toxic. Like, I know that I've been involved in scattering people's ashes in natural spaces because you feel like that's, you know, there is that ritual to that and you feel like that's what they would have wanted, and it's that connection to nature and that whole piece. And then you learn something like that and you feel awful. You're like, oh my goodness, we made the wrong decision there. But you can only do what you can do with the knowledge that you have at the time. And that's why it's important that we keep having these conversations, we keep learning, and we keep discussing openly where we're doing well, but also where we're not doing so well. And I think that's the difference between big Y businesses that really do care about the planet deeply and the ones that aren't big Y businesses and that are just greenwashing to kind of cash in on that green pound, green dollar kind of market trend, really.
Yeah, I try to take my frustration with that and turn that into action of some sort, you know, because I think, you know, we could get very wound up, couldn't we, by that kind of thing. And there's been many a post or a LinkedIn article, and I've wanted to kind of give my opinion. Yeah. But actually, you know, that's not necessarily hugely productive. Instead, I should write my own article outlining something to the contrary and allow that debate to happen. You know, in the environmental arena, there aren't always simple this or this. You know, some of it is more complicated than that, and we'll all have a different focus. I remember deciding, you know, was it more important that something was locally produced or that it was organic? You know, that's a big decision for lots of people. Which is my priority right now, or which do I feel will have the most impact? So I think there are always going to be those questions about, you know, what's the best given these conditions. What I find interesting about the funeral industry is that we can't stop death. I know because I've tried. We can't stop it happening. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of deaths. And that's not a COVID figure. You know, that's extenuated circumstances. You know, just in an average year, we need to find ways to manage our loved ones when they die that is sustainable, because we have more people, less space. And, you know, that's just a fact. And it's not a nice one, but it is something we do have to deal with. I think some things we could just stop doing, but that's one of the ones we really are just going to have to deal with because we can't stop it.
That's so true. Yeah. And just like you said, it's something that we don't necessarily like to think about. So we put it off, and, when we die, we're not the ones that have to deal with it. So you don't necessarily factor it into your eco decisions when you're kind of looking at your life. So it's really important that we have these conversations. And I think it's brilliant that you're doing the work that you're doing to start that debate, start people thinking about that death and grief, and the whole experience of that is, whether that's your own death or other people's, is definitely something where those walls just go up and those conversations don't happen.
Yeah, I don't want to minimise that. This is horrendous. This isn't something I wish I was talking about. I wish it had never happened, and there's no silver lining here.
Yeah.
And I feel really, that's a really important message, is that, I'm not in this space because I want to be. It's just a situation in which I found myself, and I feel that there's ways in which I can help others who may also find themselves in this situation. What's really interesting is that, so we chose the Woodland mostly because we have other children. So Isaac was the oldest of 4. And so we needed a space, or we wanted a space that we could take quite young children to quite regularly, and for it to not become, something they had to do, or something that they didn't look forward to, a real trial, because, this is it now. This is where we're going to be spending a lot of time. And so there were lots of other reasons why a woodland was appropriate for us that, wouldn't necessarily impact on other families. But every family I've met talk about the physical space being such a valuable part of their grief process. And in Mental Health Awareness Week, which we're also sitting, it's all going on this week, and their focus on nature this year has been really interesting for us, because I'm from a mental health background, and so being able to draw those two together has been really lovely for me. And one of the loveliest bits of feedback we've had was a review someone did whose mother is at the Woodland, and she said, I immediately knew it was the right place for my mum. I knew she would have loved it. I knew it was but I hadn't realised it was the right place for me as the person left behind. So often we make decisions for our loved one that, that they would like. But I found that really powerful, actually, that message that I hadn't really figured out what I needed, and how grateful I would be that in that space I find peace. We shouldn't forget the living when we think about these messages about how we support the dead, is actually the people left behind who are making these decisions also need support. And, the kids enjoy it. They enjoy going. And that's not just our family. We have quite a lot of families who take young children. And I can't imagine, I've never really been to a crematorium where young children go there to play. So it's also creating quite a different relationship with death. Not necessarily an easier one, but a more open one. And I think so many adults struggle to have these conversations because we've got to a point in life without ever talking about it, that we're sort of just not equipped.
That's so true.
We don't really know what to say, and we don't really know what to do or how to behave. And so we ignore it because that's the sort of safest option. And I think actually, if we did have these discussions at younger ages, they probably wouldn't be quite so difficult as adults, because they wouldn't be so new.
Yeah, I think you're so right. And I think that feedback is so moving, and just the sense of community that you've built. They say a lot with grief that it's the club that nobody wants to be in, isn't it? But then once you are in it, the solidarity between people in that club and the sense of community. And a lot of people who know Ethical Hour will know that I kind of left corporate because of my mental health after a traumatic reaction to grief, after losing a friend very suddenly. And I think what struck me at that point, I was in my kind of late 20s, no one around me other than obviously our mutual friends who were also sitting in that really heavy, difficult grief. So, we could support each other, but not really. But nobody else kind of got it. It was just that people didn't want to talk to you because it was so enormous and it was so difficult. And I think you worry, don't you, talking to someone who's gone through something like that you're going to upset them by talking about it.
Yeah, which is so hilarious. Well, not hilarious. Hilarious isn't the right word, but it's so ironic that we worry about upsetting people who are grieving. I am upset all the time.
Yeah.
I this is a tap that I work incredibly hard. It's exhausting to hold it in. So you can't upset me. It's just not possible, because I'm as upset as I could possibly be. And I think this fear of upsetting people is sort of backwards, because actually they're already upset. We could support them. And I think if we use that language, how could I support you? We would perhaps worry less about what people might tell us. And often I don't know. This is the other tricky thing. Often people grieving don't know what they need. The one thing they actually want, they absolutely 100% can't have.
Yeah.
And so it is a slightly trickier space than someone who's broken their leg, because, we don't always know what we would find helpful or comforting. But sometimes it is just the question is lovely. Just that person is thinking and attempting. I wrote a blog post about cups of tea, because for the very first time in my life, I refused a cup of tea because I really was coming out my ears. But the cup of tea was actually very symbolic, because it was about showing care and showing love. I'm going to make you this thing that I know has no impact really, but the act of making it and the act of giving it to you is all I have, really.
Yeah, and maybe it's because we're British and we love tea.
I did say to lots of other nationalities, is the tea thing British? And resoundingly, yes. I think it is a very British thing. Yeah.
No, but I agree. I find that so comforting. And at the moment, having a newborn, anyone makes me a cup of tea, they're my favourite person of the day. And I think it's because it is that act of care, and the time it takes to make that cup of tea is a little bit of time out of their day, and then it's warm and it's comforting, and there's so much symbolism around that. And I think that really echoes through for me. That, I haven't been to the Woodland, but just thinking about that as a space and knowing my experience of being in nature and finding that kind of comfort in nature and healing and processing and things. I do most of my kind of mental processing when I'm out walking and I'm in nature. And I think it's that sense of community, it's that sense of solidarity, but it's also that space. And I think there's loads of research into this, psychologically about it and things, but I just think we are part of nature, and our lives are designed to make us forget that. And actually, when we reconnect in nature, that's when we are most kind of calm and settled.
We have one of our families, and he comes and watches the sunrise at least 3 times a week. And that for him it's pretty much empty. The entire woodland, nobody really is up at that time. But he comes and he sits, and that's when he finds his peace. And it's just a fabulous thing. Now, I probably will never see the sunrise there, because it's a slightly longer journey for us, and it's usually sort of more of a planned event. But I just find that beautiful. I've never actually met that person, because they're there when I'm not there. We do have community events. So once a month, we do have something happening that everyone's welcome to join, because I think there is a shared, obviously there's no pressure to, not everybody wants to do that kind of thing, but a lot of our families do have an interest in the environment, do have, sort of green backgrounds, or their loved one did, and are sort of interested in helping us do planting, or we do litter picks, or we do foraging. We get up to all sorts of things. And there's just that opportunity, if people want it, to be around people that for a fact have been through a recent-ish bereavement. And, even though they might be vastly different in how they occurred, there is a sort of similar pattern probably to some of the experience, at least. So, yeah, we do open that up, because I think that's quite a valuable part of the process as well.
That importance of community just shows up in so many different ways in our life. And you and I met through the importance of having a community around running a small business, and actually just being able to share ideas and, support and resources and opportunities and things. That's really important. But then there's that deeper level of actually just being around people that either understand the experience that you've been through, or are willing and open enough to admit that I can't understand that, but I'm going to sit with you in it anyway, and go through that with you by your side.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely thing.
It's an interesting one talking to you about your big why, because you run your own business, but you're also working for someone else's business now with the Woodland. But obviously you have such a personal connection to it. But it's also a big why that, like you said, in terms of your work with the Woodland, that you just would not want to be there at all. And obviously we wouldn't want that for you in terms of the experience that's come from. So talk to us a little bit about kind of the big why behind your work and how that shows up for you.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it wasn't something I ever imagined I would be doing. And it wasn't. So we were clients, we were one of the families. And then because I'm just quite nosy and a little bit of a control freak, I kept saying, do you think, would it be useful, do you think, if the website had, a download of the interesting, some of the trees are sort of formed in funny shapes or, have a hole in or whatever. So, wouldn't that be nice when people visit? They could search for these particular trees and that would take them on a little route round and perhaps take some of the pressure off to only be in one space. Or do you think it would be good to have, would it be okay if I started a Facebook group just for the families? Because sometimes you want someone to check on your plot, or, you could just ask someone, can you just see if this is still up or if this fell down in a storm or something? And I think I just sort of irritated Simon, who's a really wonderful person. And in the end, he found out a bit more about me and my background, and that I did have a fundamental knowledge of the environmental aspect of things. And because I'd been running my own business, I understood social media a bit and marketing a bit, and I was happy to write a newsletter. So it was very organic and unexpected. I was unsure if it was a healthy space for me to be in. And I still have moments when I think it may not be, but I was teaching at the time and I was teaching children the same age as Isaac, and that was definitely not a healthy space for me. So it was sort of shades of grey. And I just feel so passionately about what they're doing, and it's so unusual that I just really did want to help. And the more I discovered that a lot of this natural, in inverted commas, isn't fantastic for the earth, the more I sort of got enraged, really, and wanted to say to people, actually that's not correct. So it happened very organically. And I think sometimes that's the best way. And then supporting families. We were extraordinarily well supported in many, many ways, but there were some fundamental things that were not there. And so I think that was the opportunity to support others is always really powerful.
Like so many people with a big why, you've created a job for yourself out of personal experience, out of seeing a need and wanting to respond to that, and out of that nurturing community side. That's such a common thread between the work that we all do. We just all apply it in different ways to different areas. And like you said, there's no silver lining, but it is also making sure that we leave things in a better way than we found them, in terms of the planet, but also in terms of the next person to go through similar experiences to us can maybe have a slightly easier journey, or a different journey.
Oh, 100%.
Some of the things that you...
I wrote and taught grief. Some of my workshops were on grief 10 years ago, and I had some experience of that. I didn't ever imagine I would take it to, that this experience would happen. But equally, if I were to ignore all that knowledge, then that feels wrong. It's there, I have it. And to not find a way to make that useful feels so wasteful. Yeah. I suppose it's not always easy to pin down the why, because it was sort of foisted on me, this particular why. But I think certain personalities just kind of, we're dealt the hand we're given, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of personality, did you get a chance to do our Big Why quiz?
Yes, I have. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I'm an impact innovator. It was interesting
one. Yeah, I would definitely agree with a lot of things that you've said about taking lived experience and turning that into something new. I think it's also interesting in terms of your work with Woodland Burial, because they are really kind of pioneering things in this industry, aren't they? It's an industry that is very traditional in many ways and has a lot of kind of, this is the way we do things. And impact innovation and being an impact innovator is very much about just standing in your own truth and being confident enough to not necessarily do things in that way. So I think there's a few different profiles you could have fit into in terms of the community nurturing and things that you do. But I definitely think that fits in terms of having that perspective on things to do things in a different, better way. And like you said at the beginning, always asking those questions, always being open to doing it in a different way and just being curious and finding out. I think that fits really well with the work that you're doing.
it felt a bit grander, I suppose, than I think of what I'm doing. I think the innovation thing feels really exciting. It's quite an exciting time to be involved with these two companies, because that innovation is quite dramatic, actually. So this new product from Natural Transitions, when we look at the research that they're finding, it's ecologically, it changes everything. It's a complete game changer. And when we're under to reduce our carbon, by 2030, and the funeral industry in particular is, a massive producer, and not just in terms of carbon, but in terms of chemicals and air pollution. And there's loads of things that they are going to have to deal with. And so being able to be involved with that kind of innovation that helps solve global problems is really exciting.
And interestingly, Claire, one of the biggest challenges that impact innovators face is imposter syndrome. So the fact that you're saying it feels grander than I feel I'm entitled to sounds to me like your imposter syndrome showing up a little bit there. And
it's fascinating, isn't it? I think as well, when you're a mum, and this will come to you soon, I've lectured to PhD students, sat in a lecture theatre, to hundreds of people, but my 5-year-old doesn't believe I know that spaghetti is pasta, has no value for my knowledge at all. And it's quite a leveler. And I think if you spend a lot of time with people who think what you say is nonsense, then after a while, it's quite interesting to then go back into the workspace as a professional person and remind yourself that actually you are very skilled and you do know lots of things. And yes, it's I think there's part of that as well, as I think parenting can kind of dent our confidence in our knowledge, because it's an experience where you really don't know very much.
That's so true.
Coming back into full-time professional space has been quite good for me, I think, in terms of confidence.
If you're yearning to make a difference and you get goosebumps thinking about all the ways that your business could change lives and protect the planet, then it's time to ask yourself, how will your business change the world? Find out what kind of Big Why business founder you are with our free quiz. You'll get a detailed profile exploring how to use your unique skills and superpowers to bring your vision for change to life. And you'll get tailored advice to help you overcome the challenges that you may face along the way. Head to ethicalhour.co.uk/quiz to find out what type of Big Why business founder you are today. What do you think is the best thing about bringing your Big Why to life? And I don't want that to diminish the difficult parts of your Big Why and the experience you've been through.
I think so. Some of it's been very simple. So I started a nature book club, and we're reading a different book each month. And that's been lovely because it's challenged me to spend time reading, which I love, and learning. And that's quite a few families have been involved, but also other sort of parts of my life, people have joined. So that's been lovely because I feel community is a big support in almost all areas of life. So there's the sort of quite low-key things that I feel are impactful. But I think at the moment it is the big picture stuff that I'm feeling most passionate about, because I do worry, and I have been worried for quite a long time. I remember the report came out that said, we had 12 years or 15 years at the time probably to sort this out. And I just never feel that there's been a big enough gasp and let's get going. And I still don't feel that our responses are dramatic enough. And so being able to be dramatic and call out where people are not making the effort feels the best space to be in.
I think that's so important, and I absolutely share that sense of urgency, but on the flip side of that, the frustration that there isn't a greater sense of urgency. And I know that all of us in Ethical Hour are with you on that and are working towards that. And hopefully if other people are listening, will come and join us on that too. Thank you so much for sharing your journey so openly and for sharing the work that Woodland Burial Company are doing. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Ethical Hour's Big Y Business Chats. To connect with inspiring Big Y business founders and find all the support, connection, opportunities and training that you need to make an income and an impact from your Big Y business, don't forget to join our community today. You'll find us at community.ethicalhour.com. Thank you for listening.